Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our presentation today. Our presentation is entitled Assessing Privacy and Security Risks for Your Business. My name is Noel Pearman, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Been looking forward to this. And obviously, this is an interesting and important topic. Now, this presentation is designed to be around 45 minutes long, and then after that, I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I'm going to do my best, however, to monitor. Honestly, I'm not great at multitasking. I'll do my best to monitor the chat or the questions that come in. So as questions come to you, please feel free to raise them and feel free to put them in the questions area, and I'll do my level best to address those while we're discussing when there are good times to do so. I'd like to remind you that this is a part of a series. So there have been some excellent presentations as a part of the series, and first we want to thank the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation for hosting us or giving us the opportunity to have these discussions with you. But some of the ones that have gone on before have been excellent. You have one that's gone on for privacy, which is done by our own privacy commissioner, Mr. Alex White, and also Dr. Marisa Stone from the government. They did a fantastic job outlining the PIPA legislation that is partially in effect and is going to be affecting all business owners soon on a time frame that we don't fully have clarity into when that time frame is going to be, but it's going to be sometime soon. So the timing of these presentations is excellent because in terms of understanding how we're going to manage cybersecurity risk and privacy risk, it's important to do that now as opposed to then, when the risks and the responsibilities for businesses increase over time. So the other one that was really excellent was, well, there were a couple. One was on supply chain attacks by Brett, and there's another one by Ronnie, who did cybersecurity. Covered a lot of ground and gave some really good feedback. So I'm gonna conduct this session as if most of you have spent time looking at those presentations already. I think that'll be fair to them as presenters. We're gonna cover a little bit of that ground because it's necessary if we're gonna talk about assessing privacy and security risks. But if you want the deep dives on privacy and the deep dives on security, especially go see the privacy and cybersecurity ones we've already discussed. A bit more about me. My name is Noel Pearman. My day job, I work for AXXL, and I write cyber liability policies for very large corporations. So my cyber risk knowledge is mostly assessing risks for kind of Fortune 500 types of companies. But I know we're having a bit of a small business, medium-sized business audience today, but all the issues are exactly the same. The only difference is that is a matter of scale. But in terms of the types of things you need to check off your box, the type of things you got to be aware of, those lists and those considerations are identical for large businesses and smaller businesses. But it's just a matter of, scaling down what your responsibilities are and scaling down the types of solutions you need for what will most likely be smaller problems. So that's what I do for my day job. But I'm actually here in my capacity as a member of Bermuda's Cybersecurity Governance Board. This board is a group of volunteers, essentially, who've worked to develop a cybersecurity strategy for Bermuda's most critical infrastructure in particular, but also for the island in general. So with that, let's get started. So what are we really talking about? If we're talking about assessing privacy and security risks, and for the remainder of the presentation, when we're talking about security, I'm going to be interchanging security and cybersecurity because we're talking about the same thing. If we're talking about how we assess those risks for our business, what we're really talking about is risk management. And for any business, for the companies that are on the line, risk management is an essential part of how you maintain your company and how you stay relevant in your chosen field. So risk management then is the process of identifying, assessing, and controlling threats for an organization. And these risks can stem from a variety of sources, including financial uncertainties, legal liabilities, technology issues, which we'll get into a little bit when it comes to cybersecurity, strategic management errors, which we can make, and accidents, and also natural disasters. And risk management is a mindset that we quite naturally engage in all the time. And we do this in a very informal way. Now, this is a graph from my scooter. I still ride a bike, and for some reason, of me and my friends, I'm the only one who's still riding a bike. My wife and I have 3 kids, and they often have to be in different places at the same time, so it's a necessary evil in our country. But say we're running late. Now, automatically, in a situation like that, when I'm on the bike, I start making risk management calculations. They're going to depend on several things. They're going to depend on what am I late for, how late is late, what's the weather looking like, what day is it. Depending on the weather, if it's raining, then I might make a. So the decision I'm working on is, am I gonna go for it to try and make time, or am I just going to be happy to be late? And in a situation like that, I weigh a lot of options in the beginning, and different things affect the amount of risk that I perceive in making that discussion. Is it a slow Sunday afternoon and there's not much traffic on the road? Has it been raining, which makes things very difficult for me? Is my daughter on the back, which makes me take a different decision as well. Risk management is something that we do naturally and all the time, but risk management is a business discipline for a reason. And the reason is we are not naturally good at assessing risk. The 3 things that we have on the slide here are something that we suffer from just as human beings. We have an optimistic bias. I mean, we tend to think our own risk is less than everyone else's. So even if something is impending or something is a danger to folks, we have a natural inclination to think that the risk to me is somehow a lot less than the risk to everybody else. We have a false sense of control. We sometimes think that we can control things that we have no ability to control. One of my favorite comedians, Jerry Seinfeld, would talk about how someone would strap a mattress to the top of their car, and just for extra security while they're driving down the highway, put their arm out of their vehicle and put it on top of the mattress, as if that mattress rips away, the arm is going to be able to hold it, right? That's a false sense of control. We think sometimes we can control things that we can't. And if you allow that to bleed into how we make business decisions, then we risk the success of our companies at times. Also, confirmation bias. We tend to like and listen to information that we agree with. And that doesn't serve us well if we're actually trying to get a real and an objective understanding of what risk is. So as a result, assessing risk is a disciplined endeavor, and good security and privacy risk management requires a disciplined process. Before we continue on talking about what the risks are and how they manifest, let's discuss definitions. So cybersecurity and privacy are different things that are related, they are linked, and they are somewhat interdependent, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. But in cybersecurity, the focus is on the organization. And borrowing this great definition from the privacy presentation that was done several months ago, cybersecurity is the people, processes, and technology used to protect systems and data from unauthorized access, or use, or misuse. That's very clear. That is we're going to use that as our working definition of cybersecurity. And you need to have all 3 of those things working in tandem. People, processes, and technology working together in order to secure your organization. Unauthorized access, use, or misuse is a critical part about that, to ensure that whatever is important for the organization to remain confidential is maintained confidential, and that no one is in our systems having access to things that they shouldn't have access to. Privacy, then, different from cybersecurity, focuses on the rights of individuals. Those individuals could be your customers, or they could also be your employers. Depending on the business that you do, they could be it could be the rights of individuals for someone that another company that you're doing work for. So privacy is focused on those rights of individuals as opposed to corporations. And privacy is, for your business, the management of information that relates to an individual. So security has three basic aims: to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, I'm not sure how many of you were dialed into the radio show that we did on Thursday in order to talk a bit about this seminar, but I posited a company that Shelly and Jamila and I were going to start together, and it's called Word Fried Chicken, right? Here's our logo, and here's our mascot, who we call the Admiral. So our chicken has 29 herbs and spices, and it's a special blend, and we think that no one's chicken is as good as ours. Confidentiality is critical for our business, because if we sort of just think through these examples from the standpoint of this business, confidentiality is critical. If we have crown jewels for our organization, will be that special blend of 29 herbs and spices. That needs to stay within our company and not bleed out. So we need to be able to use it, but also somehow ensure that it's not leaked. Some of the attackers that we see in the landscape are doing nothing more than causing disruption to companies. Oftentimes we see them trying to extract data, but sometimes we see them just trying to manipulate or to ruin data by just filling it full of errors, right? So for us in running our chicken business, we need to have integrity of the data and integrity of our systems to ensure that when we report on our financials at the end of the year, we only have a true set of transactions that we're reporting on, so we can understand the real impact of our business and how successful we were. And lastly is availability. If we run a very digital heavy business and our system goes down, then it's impossible for us to do the business the way we have set out to do it. So if your system is not available, you're not in business. If you can't trust your data and there's no integrity, then your business is questionable. And if you leak everything that's special about your business and you have no confidentiality, then your business will be uprooted. So security focuses on these things. So privacy is special nowadays because the PIPER legislation that is partially enacted and is going to be impacting all of our business owners comes out of a move with regard to personal data that has been sweeping, I'd say especially the US, and especially, well, it's been sweeping the entire world, but has caused a change in mindset, especially in the US and maybe even in Bermuda in terms of how we think of data. In the US, historically, data that was given to a company was always considered the property of that company. I remember when I was in university, I would buy batteries from Radio Shack, and they would ask you for your address and your date of birth and all this ridiculous, unnecessary information. But companies understood that data was power, and if you could secure as much data as you could from any or all of your customers, then in addition to what you sold them in order for them to become a customer, you have a treasure trove of data that could be otherwise monetized or taken advantage of. Whether that means you start to send people your catalog for the year, or at worst, you could package up that data and sell it to some other company who wants to use that data for its own purposes. So the model in the US was very much, if you give me data, it belongs, if you as a customer give me the company data, about you, that data belongs to me. And it is now my opportunity to do whatever I want with it. I can package it, I can sell it, I can send you things you didn't want, I can do whatever I want with that data. A much more EU mindset was that I, as a customer, give you, as the business owner, my data. That data always belongs to me, even if you have it. So with the legislation that started in the EU with the GDPR and it's kind of moved across the United States with different privacy laws that have happened there, and also those laws that the Piper legislation in Bermuda is closely modeled after, are based on that product, based on that concept that when customers give their data to companies, that data always belongs to the customer, to the individual, and therefore their expectations when data is transferred to a company. At the very basics, a client, if we in our chicken company get data from our clients, they're expecting that we ensure it's authorized use. That means that we get to use it for what we told them we were going to use it for and nothing else. And the second thing they expect is protection. If our chicken company, gets data from a client or a customer, that data is to stay with us. And they shouldn't see the implications of that data being leaked around the industry. We might have customers in our chicken company that are buying $2,000 worth of chicken every year, every month. They're eating our major chicken sandwich 2 and 3 times a day. They don't necessarily want that information outside of our company, and we will do our best if we were to protect that information. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about what types of data need to be protected. When we talk about personal data, we shorthand it as PII, personally identifiable information. And that can be all sorts of individual bits and pieces about a person's identity that could allow them to be identified, or even identified if there's cross-reference with other sets of data. So some of these I'm going to give you a list just to consider. Some of these aren't particularly nefarious or say much about you on their own. But if you can match these up with other data sets, you can learn a lot about people. So personally identifiable information includes things like your name or other names you might use, your social insurance number, either it's in its fullness or even if it's truncated, your driver's license or any other identification number like your passport, your citizenship, legal status, gender, race, ethnicity, your religion, your mother's middle name or her maiden name. And of course, we know why that's risky for that to leak, because in a lot of systems that require you to change your password, one of your control questions would be, what is your mother's maiden name? So having that information leak could be problematic. Also information about what children you have, how old your parents are. Some of these types of data become problematic because if someone gets their hands on them, they can target you even harder when it comes to other types of security risks that we'll talk about later. So sometimes the combination of these types of data can make this risky. And there are tiers of data that are even more sensitive and must be protected at a higher degree. So we have personal financial information, which is extremely important. If we are entrusted with or are holding individuals' credit card numbers, especially if you're going to include the expiration dates and the CID number on the back. Bank account numbers, the bank account numbers are a little more secure. I remember I first got my Bank of Bermuda card with my number printed on the front. I thought something was wrong with the whole system, but your account number now is much more secure than it used to be. But your PIN numbers for people's cards, things like that, and also health information. Health information is especially critical. And most of the small businesses don't deal with this, but some do. People's health status, diseases that they may have, or preconditions that they may have. That type of data is critical and not data that we ever want to be shared or leaked. So as we talk about privacy and talk about security, we see that there's a natural interdependence between the two. Security risks, as we discussed, arise from unauthorized system behavior. People who are either in your company systems doing things that they shouldn't be doing, whether that be dropping off software that's going to hurt the company, or looking at things they shouldn't be looking at. Your privacy risks arise from unauthorized access to PII, or again, personally identifiable information. And there's that part in the middle is that you need good security to ensure your privacy. So there's a dance there. And this is how the privacy regulations and responsibilities for companies are going to drive increases in security in order to make it possible for people to do what they need to do, for companies to do what they need to do. At this point, we're going to walk through some of the security threats and some of the risk points to consider. Then we're going to walk through some of the privacy threats and privacy things to consider. Talk a bit about risk assessment and risk appetite, and then talk a little bit more about mitigation. So any questions at this point, please throw them in the chat. Okay.
I know, yeah, we do have one question. So we have a question from Michelle White. She says, no, if a third-party company is an international company and is storing data in the cloud, is this sufficient to satisfy the data protection requirement? What do we need to do if the answer is yes or no?
Let me see if I can see that question. Okay, a third-party company is storing data in the cloud, it's sufficient to satisfy data protection requirement. It's a great question. It may or may not be, and it's up to you to do the due diligence for that. So depending on where your clients are, and let's talk about, for the most part, local businesses here, but there are businesses in the UK or in the EU where there are rules around how data moves between company borders. Let's assume we're not necessarily worried about that. From a privacy perspective, data protection requirement. From a privacy perspective, I'm a fan of the cloud. Most of the advanced cloud providers have privacy built in. They obviously run a model where it's a shared responsibility model where they ensure the security of the cloud, but you as a company ensure the security of what you put into the cloud. So they have rules and regulations and guidelines as to how you configure your use of cloud. And if you mess up and allow things to be leaked based on your misconfiguration of that, that is going to be on you. The same way if you misconfigured a server that was in your business and someone was allowed access to it. I find cloud providers to be really, really secure. And also the best thing about cloud providers is that they tend to have very robust redundancy. So if something happens to a server that has your data on it, there are typically several other servers that have that same data, so it could be easily restored. The last thing about the cloud is that it tends to be, the cloud providers tend to be very good at patching their systems and being on top of the latest threats. So they'll do a better job than any one of us could as a business owner. And as a part of the data requirement to protect data and to keep it private, use of the cloud is going to be great. But again, your own configuration as to how you use the cloud could open you up to risk. And the better you do that, you can minimize that risk greatly. Hopefully that answered that question. Any more questions?
Yeah, there is another one.
Shoot. Okay, yeah. But I didn't say shoot. I mean, would you mind reading it, please?
Yeah, no problem. How do you balance conflicts between organization needs versus the PII to enable transactions to take place?
That's a fantastic question. And something I was going to get to later, but let's kind of discuss it now. This is where we get into what your risk appetite is. And I like to use an analogy of a hurricane and my house. So my house is built to Bermuda code, which means it's stone and it's reinforced concrete, and everything else. But we are all at risk of damage from a hurricane. I could choose, in order to mitigate that risk, to encase my house in a retractable dome that covers my house completely and will 100% protect it from any and all damage when it comes to a hurricane situation. But there's a trade-off in that, in the sense of it's super expensive to do that. Number one, it's probably going to block much of the views from my house, things like that, and make going into my house and out of my house for all the other days of the year when we're not experiencing a hurricane much more inconvenient than it needs to be. So there is definitely a balance and a dance you have to do between how secure do I make this and how do I enable transactions to be fluid. And what most companies do is to do an assessment of what data is most critical. And if we go back to the types of PII, let's say you're a company that has health information or financial information that is extremely sensitive, and you definitely do not want that to get out. How do we control the risk around that data with additional safeguards and additional things in place? And then how do we also loosen up the controls on other data that may not be quite as sensitive, but speed our ability to actually interact and to do business? It's a balance you have to strike, but there are smart ways to go about that. But it's a great question, and your sort of service providers and your advisors in this area can help you strike a balance that's best for your company based on your risks and your needs. Any more questions?
No, the last one is just a statement from Dr. Stones. She says, under PIPA, you are still responsible for the data even if you engage a third party.
Yes, and I will underscore that as well. We mentioned that on the radio show. If we're a company getting data given to us from a client, regardless of what we do with that data, the responsibility for protecting it is always with us, 100% our responsibility and duty. So if we decide to say take that to Azure Cloud or to Amazon Web Services Cloud, or to give it to a third party, or to put it on a disk drive and give it to a friend of ours to say, hey, can you secure this for me? If that third party loses that data or corrupts it or destroys it, that is our responsibility, because we should have vetted the companies that we have entrusted that data to. So that's a great point, Dr. Stens.
No more questions for now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm just going to talk a little bit about security threats, because we do have to introduce some of this in order to talk about assessment, and a bit more about on the privacy side as well. So security threats, the ones you're majorly going to be considering are phishing, malware, and ransomware. Phishing is the use of several tactics, which could be email attachments, which could be URLs and emails. All that phishing is looking for is a set of accurate and true credentials in order to get into one system or another, right? So in the same way, we get an email that looks like it's coming from Bank of Butterfield, but it's actually coming from Bank of Butterfield, and we put in our credentials in order to get into our banking website. They steal those credentials and they run off and spend our money if they're able to. This type of deal is really important for us to consider, because phishing is the number one sort of in for the other two types of security threats. Malware is simply software that is designed to do something bad to your system. That bad thing could be a number of things that it may be designed to do. It could be designed to shut your system down. It could be designed to just corrupt your data. It could be designed to allow access to your system from a second or a third computer that will start sending instructions to your system. That's malware, and ransomware is just a special particular kind of malware, which is designed to encrypt your system, to lock your system, so that the attacker can require you to pay them to get out of your system, to require you to pay a ransom in order to get out. That can be hugely disruptive, and there are things we can do, which we'll talk a little bit about later, in order to mitigate all of these risks. But these are the types of threats that you're going to be considering in terms of running your security risk assessment. And if we're doing an assessment, there are some questions we have to ask ourselves as businesses. Number one, what are the basics? And the basics are going to include, number one, training your employees. If you build a cyber defense wall around your organization, but your employees are going to get up and just open the door for attackers to come in, that's going to be a huge problem. So number one line of defense is going to be, in addition to, remember, is people, process, and technology, right? So for the people part of it, while technology is going to do what it can, for the people part of it, you have to train people as to what fraudulent or otherwise nefarious emails look like. You have to train them to do things like, not insert USB drives into their work computers, or shut down those drives, those drives completely, block that type of access. Not to click on links that are in emails, or to definitely open attachments that look fishy. Also, you have to have the technology to do things like, if employee A comes across something that looks nefarious, they can alert the whole company, or at least alert the IT organization, but could then alert the rest of the company. That type of thing are the basics. Basics include things like, how are you protecting your crown jewels? What are the additional controls that you have around the most critical parts of your business, or our 29 herbs and spices recipe for our Warwick fried chicken? Do you operate on a principle of least privilege? Like, does everyone have access to everything? And historically, you'd see people transferring money, people doing things that they certainly did not need the access to do in order to run their day job, in order to do what they have to do for the company. So whereas you'd have, say, a secretary in a law firm that has access to every file in the company, now you try and limit the access for people in your business to just what they need in order to do their business and no more. So even if they're compromised, they don't compromise the entire company at the same time. Again, I'm going to refer you back to the presentation done on cybersecurity to see a lot more of what the basics include. But there are things as a business owner that you can definitely do in order to ensure that you've covered the basics. But then there's a question: how well have we covered them? So sometimes, again, as you do the research to figure out what the basics are, you have to sort of go over how well you've done that, and that leads to the next question: is our baby ugly, right? And oftentimes we are just too enamored with things that we have done. The same way, if you ask a parent if they have an ugly baby, they'll say, no, this is the most beautiful child in the world. Is our baby ugly is a question that we ask in order to remind ourselves that we need to have some third parties or other licensed and experienced companies or individuals looking at what we've done, who are able to tell us if it's good or bad. So this is where it's critical for us to get help from a third party provider. Again, what is your risk appetite? And this goes back to the question that we had later. If I go back to my example of the hurricane and the dome over my house, I might decide that the risk based on my strongly constructed house will be best mitigated just by covering my windows when there's a storm, but I'll hold the risk that the house will get blown down by not putting up a dome. So we have to look at the risk to your organization and to say, is this a risk? And how much of this risk am I willing to just hold as an organization? How much of it do I need to mitigate with some other controlling factor? And lastly, what is our action plan? If you're on the radio, I mentioned this on the radio, and I mentioned the song that goes with this particular graphic. But if there's something strange in the neighborhood, who are you gonna call? And the whole idea of that Ghostbusters song is that There are some problems that you run into as an individual, that say ghosts, that you're not expected to know how to deal with those. You're expected to call the experts. And it's the same when it comes to an action plan with regard to your security assessment as well. You don't always have to know everything about how to mitigate an issue, but you do, once you've figured out that an issue might be happening in your company, you do have to know what to do next, and you do have to know who to call next. For big companies, that call is often first to a bank of third-party providers they've set aside and who are on call in case something goes wrong. I gave this example on the radio, and I'll give it again. When, like, I am the chief security officer at my house, and there are certain things I'm designed to make sure of in terms of protecting my home. I'm to ensure that or my wife and I guess, will ensure that the windows are all closed at night, that they're locked, that the blinds are down, that the security system is on, that the door is locked and closed, and we have a certain amount of understanding of what is normal in order to secure our home. But what if something happens? And let's say we go out for the day, and on the way back, I notice that a window's been broken, and it appears that someone's been in my house. There are things that I do immediately, like get out of the car, ensure that there's no one still in the house, have a glance as to what's been stolen, and things like that. The next thing I'm going to do is going to call an expert, because what you don't expect me to do is to start dusting for fingerprints or taking molds of footprints that are in the garden in order to identify the shoe type and shoe size of someone. That's not the type of thing you expect me to be responsible for. You expect me to make a call to the people who are experts and do that. For your organization, you have to, in your security risk assessment, you have to say you have to understand what is it that we should be able to do, and then what is it that we call the experts to do, and who are those experts? In addition to all these things, we talked about training for employees. This is a part of that training process as well. Sometimes your company may be going through an incident and not fully aware of what's happening. And until your employees are trained to look for indicators, to train to look for stuff like, maybe it's very difficult for me to do the normal business that I do. I can't access the same server I've been accessing in order to do my job since forever. All of a sudden, I don't have access. All of a sudden, our systems are slow, and it seems as if something is sort of gelling up our system and is working more slowly than before. Those are indicators that there may have been some compromise, and it may be time to call somebody. So the training has to be what the employees need to look for, but also if something happens, we run through how do we execute when something looks like it's going off. On the privacy side, we have to do a risk assessment here as well. We have to ask the questions like, what personal data do we hold? As a holding that data, what risk does it pose to us? As a result, what do we need, and where is that data? What data do we need, and where is that data? How is it protected? Now, there's a way to run our chicken company so that we have no personal data at all. We could just be a chicken company that makes chicken sandwiches and chicken meals, and we run 100% through Sargasso. So Sargasso has all our client information. Sargasso takes all the payments. Sargasso knows where it gets delivered, so we don't have anybody's name or address. We could structure our company so that we have no data whatsoever. But that might not be the company we want to run. If we want to interact with our customers, we want to understand their needs, you want to send them some useful information, maybe targeted ads, coupons, etc., and we want to create a relationship, then we need to begin taking in data, but understanding what data we need, where it's going to be, understanding the flow of that data for organization, and to be able to respond to requests for that data or requests to destroy that data. So that's a part of your privacy risk assessment. Another critical part of that is going to be your privacy impact assessment. A privacy impact assessment is a decision tool to identify and mitigate privacy risks. It details why PII is being collected in the first place, how it's going to be collected, what we're going to use it for, who's going to access it and who's not going to be able to access it, will it be shared or not, how will it be shared, how do we protect it, and how do we store it. The Privacy Commissioner's Office is working on some guidelines for this for small and medium-sized businesses in Bermuda. So keep an eye out for that. But this is the type of assessment you're going to have to do in order to get your arms around the privacy impact of the data that you hold. And the last thing, and this piggybacks off of what we talked about with the Ghostbusters, etc. There are third parties that can help you think your way through these issues. Obviously, I sell insurance all day, and insurance is a huge partner. The insurance company relationship at its best is when the insurance company, which has a bunch of data gathered from many different sources and many different clients, leverages that to help you to understand what you need to do in order to be a better risk. And the same way is we're going to be filling out an application for car insurance, and they're going to ask us things like, well, how many times have you sped in the last year? And they ask us about the things that make us a more difficult or challenging risk. The application process for like cyber insurance will help you to understand what are the things that a good risk does. I know there are some sellers for cyber insurance here on the island. I'm not here to advertise any, but I know Friesenbrook Meyer has a solution for cyber companies for companies from a cyber liability standpoint. But that kind of process is going to be good in order to help you know what you should be looking for in your business. The Privacy Commissioner's Office. Right now is a fantastic time to reach out to Commissioner White at the Privacy Office because the PIPA legislation is not fully enacted. The parts that are enacted include the fact that his office has been established, his role and his authorities have been established. But in terms of consequences for anything that may run afoul of the rules are not in effect yet. So right now he's just a huge resource, and he'd love for you to reach out to him. I spoke to him today. He's like the nicest guy, and at this point, he can just be a resource to your business to say, "Hey, this is the plan that we've come up with. This is what we think is going to be successful or sufficient when the privacy and the PIPA legislation is effected. Give us your opinion on it. Like, give us your feel for how this works." And he's 100% down for that. And I would, if I was a small business, a medium-sized business owner, in advance of the actual legislation part being effective, that puts the requirements on you. If you can get in and have a conversation with the privacy commissioner in his office, that would be a huge leg up. And I look at him as a resource at this point. Lastly, third-party assessors, companies that can come in and just, in a similar way that you do with the privacy commissioner, just help you maybe on the security side or on the privacy side. Just say, look, here's what we put in place. How good of a job have we done? And another point I made earlier is that it's important as you scale your business to just get this right from the beginning. It is possible to sort of build your business from small to sort of large, small, then to medium size, and then have to sort of re-architect what you've done in order to better comply with the regulations. But if you just start with a mindset around privacy and security from the beginning as you build, or get it in as early as possible, there are a number of benefits to your business. Number one, you're just smart about how you do things. Number two, if you try and comply with the privacy rules, it makes your business more efficient from a privacy perspective, from a records perspective. The rules around how to control the flow of data and to understand where data is and to have data accessible, that just makes your business a better business. So that's my presentation today. We were right just past the 45-minute mark in terms of the assessment part, risk and assessment part for privacy and security. And I'm just going to open up the floor for some Q&A at this point. Do we have any questions? I cannot see this thing.
No, not at the moment, but I feel like people are probably just taking a bit of time to type them out.
All right, yeah, we'll give it a minute or so. Let me know if you
Okay,
got one.
yeah, they're coming in now. Someone says,
Cool.
if my company works for and uses data from other companies, not personal individuals, how does PIPA apply?
That's a good question. I'm actually going to defer that question to the privacy commissioner. 'Cause I'm not 100% sure how it works if you're just dealing with business to business data. Yeah, I'm going to refer that one to the privacy commissioner's office.
There's another one that says, does the cybersecurity board that you sit on have a website and produce newsletters, etc.?
No, we don't. Kind of like a lack of a better word, and the board might hate this word. Almost like a shadow board at this moment. We've been working for years. Just put it together mainly with a national focus. Some guidelines around how to manage critical infrastructure, which there's another one of these seminars that comes later on done by Steve Caution. He's going to be addressing that. But no, but we do work. There are members of the board who are involved with cybertips.pm, and there are huge resources there. And every so often, we're involved in some of the presentations either to seniors or to other stakeholders in the community. But no, nothing like a newsletter. I don't think we have a website, although Dr. Stones can correct me if needed.
And another one that says, any advice on how a small or medium business will prepare to deal with data breaches after doing risk assessments?
That's a great question. Um, I'm assuming that well, depending on how you've architected your business, um, there are sort of cloud providers that can help you. I think companies do a fair amount of outsourcing when they're at a certain size, and whoever you've done your outsourcing work with can assist. But in terms of what to do next, other than online resources, your best bet is to hang on a second. Yeah, after you go through your risk assessment, you get the next step is to then put in mitigation procedures. If you go back to the security presentation that was done by Ronnie Vieira earlier, once you see what the risks are, a lot of those risks, after risk assessment, your action plan is going to build in exactly what to do next. So, for instance, if you have a ransomware situation where your company is locked up by an external attacker, your backup strategy is going to be in place in order to mitigate that. So, in other words, you have a backup of your system somewhere else so that if your first system gets locked up, you can say, okay, guys, we're not sending you a ransom. We're just going to fail over to our backup. We're going to run our business that way. And we have done our backups in a way to make sure that you can't encrypt both of them. So after your risk assessment, then you do the work of figuring out exactly how do we mitigate all these. And third-party advisors can help you, but there's a lot of basic blocking and tackling that does 90% of the work in terms of getting you to a much safer position.
Are there any businesses that provide you with a risk evaluation to advise on what is best security-wise?
I know that there are companies that do that as a part of a service they might sell you. Like I know the cloud providers will help you with that type of deal in Bermuda. In terms of, and I'm sorry I don't have this information, but in terms of the people that just come in and just do a security assessment, I know there are some, but I just don't have their names at hand right now.
And then the last question that I see so far, is purchasing a VPN a smart idea to protect your business's cybersecurity?
Yes, and I would say yes, it's smart, but it's also not sufficient. VPNs, well, VPNs are, I think they're critical actually. So, if you're gonna put your company behind a VPN and it really allows you to control access to your company, especially remotely, I think that's a fantastic idea. Just ensure that it's configured correctly and it's serving the purpose that you want it to serve. So you may need some technical support with that, but VPN is a yes, but obviously best appropriately configured to protect your business.
What are some things to look out for to know that you have had a breach in cybersecurity?
Great question. The most sophisticated of attackers will be in your system and you will have no idea. Right now, obviously, those types of resources and skills are probably saved for the larger organizations where it takes a lot of patience and know-how in order to breach those systems and to stay and to observe and not be caught. The types of attacks that are going to be hitting those small and medium-sized businesses are going to be kind of the scatter shot. We broadly exploit a vulnerability that we can see, and we'll just kind of exploit whoever kind of falls victim to it. Less like intentional targeting for smaller companies. So it is difficult, and I think the stats were, even for the bigger companies, how long an attacker was in their system before they were discovered. It was like the average was like 4 months. So for businesses like you, you'd have to be attuned to noticing that something is going wrong, something that you typically can access, you can't access, or something that typically takes 5 minutes might take 10. And it's not always easy to see. So it's just keeping a vigilant eye of how your system is working, not accepting necessarily that just because something is slow is that just kind of how it is today, and just not being afraid to sort of ask someone to check if you think something untoward might be happening.
Another one just came in. What strategies and guidance do you have for using web data analytics to determine if a problem may be evolving?
I'm going to have to ask for a bit more clarity because I'm not sure exactly what they mean by web data analytics and what sphere. Maybe you can give a second or so for maybe a bit of clarification on that question.
No problem. They followed up with, if an extra high amount of traffic is being observed, could this be the beginning of an attack?
Yes, absolutely. One of the most common ways of breaking systems is to just send, well, it's called a distributed denial of service attack, is to send way more traffic to that system than it's designed for. And if you think of a physical store, let's say that your company's online store was, say, the size of Sports R Us. What they do essentially is to send 1,000 people there, and your legitimate customers can't come in and can't come out, so they can't access the store to actually, and they can shut you down that way. If you see something like that happening, I would definitely suggest that you maybe falling victim to some type of attack. Many companies have like a third-party provider who can, depending on how your system is architected, but have a third-party provider who you can let know, and they can kind of, in a temporary basis, open up your capacity to ensure that whoever's trying to get in can get in, and they can also help boot out whoever's trying to attack you. Those types of attacks are rare, and I think they're designed mostly for much larger organizations. But if you see that type of activity happening, reach out.
Is it important to keep these risk and vendor assessments, security plans, etc.? How could they help us outside of just decision making internally?
Fantastic question. You know what's strange about cyber incidents is that it's a weird type of crime in that the minute the crime happens to you, all the questions are put to you in terms of what you did in order to mitigate that risk. Like, how did you let that happen? So rather than going after the attackers, people tend to come after the company to say, how did you fail, right? So keeping these types of assessments is going to be critical actually as part of PIPER legislation in order to demonstrate that you have done the work necessary to assess the risk and to mitigate the risk as best you can, because even the best and most secure companies are going to have issues sometimes. The problem comes when you haven't done your level best to manage the risk or even to assess the risk. So keeping these type of assessments around are going to be good for both decision making, but also in the unfortunate situation where you have to prove that you did your level best. You'll have all the documentation and processes in hand to show that if necessary.
And then probably the last question before we wrap up, which companies are best to assist you with making sure that you have the most secure network for your business? Is it your internet service provider or a third party? How do we know that they are not scamming you?
Yeah, probably not your ISP. That's probably not what you're going to be looking to them for. It'll have to be a third, in my opinion, it has to be a third party provider. Your ISP provides you a pipe and access. It is your job to secure that access as best you can, not necessarily theirs. So I would go with a third party provider. And again, I apologize, I don't have lists of folks who do that in Bermuda. But there are some companies that would get that, and hopefully we'd be able to get that information out if we get our hands on it before long. But ask for the experts to sort of give you a feel on that. But yeah, I would not rely on the ISP for that unless they provide it as an actual paid service, in which case they can probably help.
Right, and then this seems the last question. If a business, not a bank or health facility, insists on collecting PII, i.e. date of birth, that you believe they have no legitimate need in order to conduct their business, and you're concerned with their ability to keep it safe, how do you address this, or who would you report this to?
It's a great question. I think you can have a discussion with the Privacy Commissioner's office, but it's that company, as long as that company is telling you that they're asking you for that data and telling you what they're doing with that data and how they plan on using it and how they're protecting it, it is then your decision to decide whether or not you're going to like be a customer. Now, we have providers that we must use, like we're all using Belco. So it depends if you're talking about like a monopoly like that. But if you're talking about like a competitor, it is your choice. And privacy is a personal choice. There are some folks that won't use WhatsApp because it's owned by Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and they just don't trust that company. So regardless of the fact that we're all WhatsApping, some people will not make that choice. It's a personal choice for you and for your business. And you know, if more people make that choice, then it helps to show that particular company how important cybersecurity and privacy is to you, the customer.
Yep, so those are all the questions.
Folks, thank you so much for your engagement this afternoon. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. Reach out to me if you want to have any additional questions. I'm happy to do that. Reach out to the Privacy Commissioner's office as well. I know I said his name like 1,000 times already, but he's accessible and a good person for you to consider. And we look forward to continuing the discussion with the other seminars that are going to be on their way. Thanks. Have a great afternoon.